The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime that felt too quiet for a building this large, and Elias Carter stepped out before the number above the frame fully registered. The air on this floor was cooler, sharper, carrying none of the usual hum of maintenance carts or distant conversations, and for a second he thought the place might not even be open yet. He shifted the weight of his tool bag against his palm, glancing down at the polished stone beneath his boots, too clean, too reflective, catching the overhead light in a way that made his own reflection look out of place. He turned slightly, just enough to check the panel beside the elevator, and saw the number he did not recognize from any of his assigned work orders. Executive level. His shoulders tightened a fraction, not panic, just recalibration. He took a slow breath through his nose, steady, controlled, then stepped back half a pace as if the floor itself might correct the mistake if he gave it room. The hallway stretched ahead in a straight, silent line, glass walls on one side revealing a skyline still waking under a pale gray morning, and along that glass, a figure stood motionless, a woman in a tailored charcoal suit, her back to him, one hand resting lightly against the window as if testing the temperature of the glass. There was something off in the stillness, not staged, not intentional, just a pause that did not belong to a place built on schedules. Elias did not move forward. He angled his body slightly toward the elevator again, but did not press the button yet. His eyes lifted once more, not staring, just checking distance, position, whether he had already been noticed. The woman shifted, barely, the heel of her shoe adjusting against the floor with a soft, precise click that echoed more than it should have. It carried down the hallway and settled somewhere between them. She did not turn immediately. Instead, her reflection appeared first in the glass, a faint outline layered over the city behind her. Then, slowly, she turned her head. Her gaze found him without searching. Elias straightened instinctively, not stiff, just present, the way a man does when he realizes he has stepped into someone else's space. His grip on the tool bag loosened, then settled again. He gave a small nod, polite, neutral, the kind that did not ask for anything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The building seemed to hold its breath around that silence. Somewhere far below, a car horn sounded, distant, out of sync with the quiet up here. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture sharpened, not defensive, just aware. Elias shifted his weight back onto his right foot, creating a little more distance without stepping away entirely. He turned his head slightly toward the elevator panel, eyes flicking to the call button, then back once, just to make sure he was not interrupting something he could not see. He pressed the button. The soft glow appeared beneath his fingertip. Behind him, the doors remained closed for a beat longer than expected. In that extra second, the reflection in the glass held steady, her gaze still there, not dismissing, not inviting, just not looking away. The elevator did not arrive right away. The delay stretched just enough to make the stillness feel intentional, as if the floor itself was deciding whether to let him leave. Elias lowered his gaze briefly, not to avoid her, but to reset his focus, letting his eyes land on the seam where the wall met the floor, tracing it for a second before lifting them again. He adjusted the strap of his tool bag on his shoulder, the fabric brushing softly against his sleeve, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have been. His stance shifted a few inches back, creating a clearer line between himself and the open space ahead, as though marking a boundary without stepping out of place entirely. Across the hallway, Victoria's posture remained composed, but her hand no longer rested against the glass. It hovered just off it now, fingers slightly curved, as if she had paused mid-thought and never finished the gesture. She did not speak, did not move closer, yet her attention stayed fixed in a way that made the distance between them feel measured rather than accidental. Somewhere behind the walls, a ventilation system cycled on with a low, steady hum, filling the silence without breaking it. Elias glanced once more at the elevator panel, the soft glow still lit beneath his fingertip from before, then eased his shoulders down, letting the tension settle into something quieter. When the doors finally began to part, he did not step in immediately. He waited half a beat, giving the space one last look, not searching for permission, just acknowledging it, then turned slightly, keeping his movement contained as he prepared to leave without disturbing whatever this moment had been. The elevator doors closed behind him with a quiet seal, and the hum of descent settled into a steady rhythm that felt more familiar, more grounded. Elias stood near the corner, not leaning, just letting the motion carry him down as his fingers shifted slightly on the handle of his tool bag, adjusting the grip without looking at it. His reflection in the brushed steel panel was softer here, less defined than the sharp glass upstairs, and he watched it for a moment before letting his gaze drop to the floor indicator, the numbers counting down at an even pace. When the doors opened to the lower levels, the air changed again, warmer, carrying the faint scent of cleaning solution and distant coffee, and the quiet returned to something ordinary. He stepped out, turning his shoulders just enough to avoid brushing past a cart left near the wall, one wheel angled outward like it had been stopped mid-task. The rest of his shift moved in small, deliberate pieces, tightening a loose fixture in a service corridor, checking a panel in a break room where the lights flickered at the edges. Each task finished clean, without pause or excess movement. Still, now and then, there was a half-second delay before he reached for a tool, a brief stillness before he moved on, like something in his timing had shifted and not fully reset. By late afternoon, the sky outside had taken on that pale gold that slips between buildings and lands in narrow strips across the sidewalk, and Elias walked the 4 blocks to his apartment with the same steady pace, his boots striking the pavement in a quiet, even cadence. He paused once at the corner, not because of traffic, but to adjust the strap of his bag again, sliding it a little higher on his shoulder as he glanced briefly at the glass of a storefront, catching a faint reflection that reminded him, for just a second, of that upper floor window. Then the moment passed, replaced by the sound of a bus pulling up and the low murmur of people heading home. His building sat above a small hardware store, the kind with a bell that chimed when the door opened, and the stairs to his apartment creaked in a familiar pattern under his weight. Inside, the space was modest but ordered, a couch worn at the edges, a small kitchen where the light above the sink flickered once before settling, and a narrow table pushed against the wall with 2 chairs that did not quite match. On the fridge, a calendar marked in careful handwriting tracked school days and grocery runs, a few drawings held up by magnets that had lost their shine. From the bedroom, a soft voice carried out, reading aloud in a slow, steady rhythm. Stumbling slightly on longer words, Elias set his bag down by the door, the weight leaving his hand with a quiet thud, and walked in just far enough to lean against the frame. His son, Marcus, sat cross-legged on the bed, a book open in his lap, brow furrowed in concentration. "You got it," Elias said, his voice low, even. Marcus looked up, a small smile breaking through the focus, then went back to the page, sounding out the next line with more confidence. Elias watched for a moment, then moved to the kitchen, filling a glass with water, the tap running a second longer than needed before he turned it off. He took a sip, set the glass down, and rested his hand briefly on the counter, fingers spread as if grounding himself in the familiar surface. The apartment held its own quiet, different from the silence upstairs, softer, lived in, with the faint hum of a refrigerator and the occasional turn of a page from the other room. When Marcus finished the chapter, he padded into the kitchen, holding the book out like proof. Elias nodded once, taking it and flipping through the pages, not reading, just acknowledging the effort. "Dinner soon," he said, and Marcus nodded. Already turning toward the small table, Elias moved through the routine without hurry, pulling ingredients from the fridge, setting a pan on the stove, the click of the burner steady and predictable. Yet even here, in the rhythm he knew by heart, there was a slight pause now and then, a breath held a fraction longer, as if something from earlier had not fully settled. When he reached for the salt, his hand hovered for a second before closing around it, and he adjusted the flame just a touch lower than usual, watching it steady into a calm blue. Outside, the last light slipped away from the window, leaving the room in a warm, quiet glow, and Elias stood there for a moment, not thinking, not searching, just letting the day settle into place, piece by piece, until everything felt where it belonged again, or close enough to it. Morning came with a softer light, filtered through the high glass panels of the lower floors, and by the time Elias stepped back into the building, the rhythm had already returned to its usual pace. Footsteps layered over distant conversations, the quiet hum of elevators moving up and down without pause. He adjusted the cuff of his sleeve before crossing the lobby, his tool bag resting lower against his side today. The strap shifted slightly from where it had been the day before. Nothing in the space announced itself as different. Yet as he passed the security desk, he noticed the guard's greeting land a fraction slower than usual, as if recognition had to travel a longer path before arriving. Elias nodded once in return, keeping his pace steady, not slowing, not quickening. His route took him through a service corridor first, where the overhead lights flickered once before settling into a consistent glow. And he paused there, not because the flicker required it, but because he allowed himself a second longer to watch it stabilize, his hand resting lightly against the edge of a panel he did not open. When he moved on, he chose the longer hallway instead of the shortcut he usually took, a quiet adjustment that did not draw attention but altered the timing of his steps. As he approached the bank of elevators, the sound shifted again, less crowded, more contained. The echo of heels somewhere above filtering down in faint, measured taps. He pressed the call button, then stepped back, leaving more space between himself and the doors than before, his weight settling evenly across both feet. When the elevator arrived, he entered without hesitation, but his eyes did not go immediately to the floor numbers. They lingered briefly on the mirrored surface, catching the outline of his own posture, straight but relaxed, before moving to the panel. His finger hovered for a moment over the usual selection, then pressed it with a controlled, deliberate motion. The ascent was smooth, uninterrupted, and when the doors opened onto the mid-level floors, he stepped out into a corridor lined with offices where voices carried through partially open doors, clipped, efficient, always moving toward the next decision. He walked through without breaking stride, though once, as a group passed in the opposite direction, their conversation dipped just slightly as they moved around him, a subtle shift that settled back into place as soon as he was behind them. Further down, near a junction that led toward the upper levels, the light changed again, cooler, more precise, reflecting off the polished surfaces in a way that sharpened edges and softened shadows at the same time. Elias slowed there, not stopping, just letting his pace ease enough to register the difference. He did not look directly toward the elevators that led higher, but his awareness of them sat quietly at the edge of his movement, like a note held just beneath the surface. He adjusted the position of his bag again, sliding it forward slightly, his fingers brushing against the worn fabric before releasing it. A pair of assistants crossed the hallway ahead, their steps quick but measured, and for a brief moment, one of them glanced in his direction, then looked away, the interaction so slight it might not have happened at all. Elias continued on, turning into another corridor where the sound of typing and the low hum of printers created a steady background. He set his bag down near a wall panel, crouching to check a connection, his movements precise, unhurried, the work done with the same care as always. Still, as he reached to tighten a screw, there was that small pause again, a fraction of a second where his hand hovered before completing the motion. When he stood, he did not immediately pick up the bag. Instead, he let his gaze move once along the length of the hallway, not searching, not expecting, just taking in the space as it existed around him. Somewhere above, a door closed with a soft, controlled sound, followed by the faint echo of footsteps that did not hurry. Elias lifted the bag, settling it against his side, and resumed his path, the rhythm of his steps even, contained, yet carrying that quiet awareness with him, as if the building itself had shifted just enough to be noticed and not enough to be explained. The request came through a tablet mounted near the service junction, a small notification blinking once before settling into a steady icon. Elias wiped his hand lightly on a cloth tucked into his back pocket before tapping the screen, his finger deliberate, not rushed. The assignment was simple on the surface, a panel inspection on the executive floor perimeter, not urgent, but marked for same-day completion. He stood there for a second after reading it, not hesitating exactly, just letting the information settle into the rhythm of the morning. Then he picked up his tool bag and turned toward the elevators that led higher. The hallway felt narrower on the way back, not in measurement, but in how sound moved through it, voices thinning out as he approached the restricted levels. When the elevator doors opened, he stepped in alone, the mirrored walls catching the line of his shoulders and the weight of the bag against his side. His hand hovered near the panel for a brief moment before selecting the floor, then lowered, fingers resting lightly against the seam of the door. The ascent was smooth, but slower than he remembered, or maybe it only felt that way. When the doors parted, the air changed again, cooler, quieter, the kind of quiet that carried intention. Elias stepped out, his boots landing softer on the polished surface, his pace adjusting without effort. A few people were already there, assistants moving between offices, their steps measured, voices low, but as he crossed into the corridor, the pattern shifted slightly. One conversation paused mid-sentence, not stopped, just held for a fraction longer than necessary before resuming. Another glance lingered a beat too long before turning away. Nothing overt, nothing that asked for a response, but enough to register. Elias continued forward, his gaze steady, not fixed on anyone, not avoiding anyone either. He set his bag down near the wall panel he had been assigned to check, the sound of it meeting the floor clean and controlled. As he crouched, he became aware of the reflection in the glass opposite him, not sharp, but present, a faint outline of movement behind him. He did not turn. Instead, he adjusted his position slightly, aligning himself more squarely with the panel, giving his work a clear frame. The screws came loose one by one under his hand, each turn measured, the small clicks consistent, almost grounding. Still, the space around him felt more contained now, as if the corridor had drawn in by an inch. Footsteps approached, slower than the quick pace of the assistants from earlier, heels placing down with precision. They did not pass immediately. They slowed, then stopped somewhere just beyond the edge of his direct line of sight. Elias paused with the screwdriver resting against the panel, not lifting his head, just letting the pause exist. Then he resumed, finishing the last turn before easing the panel open. Inside, the wiring was intact, the connections firm, nothing that demanded immediate correction. He checked each line anyway, his fingers moving with the same care as always, not rushing to finish, not extending the task either. The presence behind him did not move away. It remained steady, controlled, close enough to shift the air, but not close enough to intrude. A reflection caught in the polished surface of a nearby column showed a partial silhouette, the clean line of a suit, the stillness of someone who did not need to step closer to be noticed. Elias reached for a small tool, his hand brushing the edge of the bag before finding it. A slight adjustment in angle as he continued the inspection, he tightened one connection that did not need tightening, not out of uncertainty, but out of completion, leaving nothing open, nothing loose. The corridor held its quiet, but it was a different kind now, more focused, as if the space itself had turned its attention inward. Somewhere down the hall, a phone vibrated once against a desk, the sound contained, quickly silenced. Elias closed the panel, aligning it carefully before securing the screws back into place, each turn bringing the surface flush with the wall. When he stood, he did not turn immediately. He wiped his hands on the cloth again, folding it once before sliding it back into his pocket. Then he picked up his bag, shifting its weight slightly higher on his shoulder. Only then did he allow his gaze to move, not directly toward the figure behind him, but along the corridor, taking in the space in a single, measured sweep. The presence remained, unchanged, not stepping forward, not stepping away. Elias adjusted his stance by a fraction, giving a little more space, without altering his path, and began to walk, his pace even, his posture steady. As he passed the point where the reflection had shown the silhouette, he did not look, but he felt the shift in alignment, the subtle change in distance as he moved through the space. Behind him, the quiet held for a second longer than before, then resumed its previous rhythm, though something in it remained slightly altered, like a note that had been struck and not fully faded. Elias continued down the corridor, his steps consistent, his focus returned to the tasks ahead, yet carrying with him the weight of being seen more clearly than before, not challenged, not questioned, just acknowledged in a way that did not ask anything, and did not release anything either. The corridor settled into a quieter rhythm after he passed, but not the same one it had before. Elias moved toward the far end where the glass panels met a narrow junction leading to a service alcove, his steps measured, his shoulders relaxed, though something in the air still held that faint, contained attention. Near the corner, A small cleaning cart had been left angled slightly into the walkway. One of its front wheels turned inward so it dragged. Instead of rolling straight, a paper cup sat on the top shelf, half full, condensation collecting along the rim, slowly forming a thin line that slipped down and dropped onto the polished floor. The drip left a faint mark that caught the light just enough to be noticed if you were looking for it, but not enough for anyone passing at a distance to stop. Elias slowed, not stopping fully, just enough to register the misalignment of the cart and the slow, uneven path of the water. His gaze moved once along the corridor behind him, not searching, just aware of the space he had come through. The presence from before had not followed, but it had not disappeared either. It lingered somewhere in the structure of the place. He shifted his bag slightly forward, freeing one hand, and stood there for a brief second longer than the movement required, as if weighing whether the interruption belonged to him. Then he set the bag down beside the wall, not in the center of the walkway, but tucked, just enough to keep the path clear. He reached for the cart first, adjusting the wheel with a small, precise motion until it aligned with the frame, then rolled it back half a foot so it sat flush against the wall, its shadow narrowing along the baseboard. The cup came next. He lifted it carefully, not to throw it away immediately, but to stop the drip with his other hand. He pulled the cloth from his pocket and pressed it lightly against the floor where the water had begun to spread, holding it there for a moment before wiping in a single, controlled motion that followed the grain of the tile. The mark disappeared, leaving the surface consistent again, uninterrupted. He folded the cloth once, tighter this time, and slipped it back into place. The cup he carried to a nearby bin, dropping it in without looking down, the soft sound of it landing contained within the quiet. For a moment, nothing moved. The corridor held a deeper stillness, not empty, but attentive in a way that did not ask for acknowledgement. Somewhere behind the glass, a figure paused mid-step, the reflection catching a brief shift before continuing on. Elias returned to his bag, lifting it with the same steady motion, his fingers adjusting the strap as it settled against his shoulder. He did not look back at the spot he had just cleared, nor did he check if anyone had noticed. The space spoke for itself now, the path open, the floor clean, the cart aligned as if it had always been that way. If you have ever fixed something small without anyone asking, you know how quickly the moment passes, how the change remains while the action disappears. Elias stepped forward again, his pace even, the rhythm restored, yet something in the air had shifted just enough to hold a trace of what had just happened, not visible, not spoken, but present in the way the silence settled around it, a little steadier, a little more aware, as he moved on without carrying it with him. The corridor did not reset after he moved on. It held a quieter order now, the kind that settles in after something small has been corrected. Farther down, near the intersection where the glass panels widened into a seating alcove, a pair of assistants approached at a steady pace, one glancing at a tablet, the other speaking in a low, clipped rhythm. As they rounded the corner, their steps adjusted without breaking stride, the cart no longer edging into their path, the floor beneath them dry and uninterrupted. The shift was subtle, but it registered a half-second less of hesitation, a smoother line through the space. One of them slowed just enough to look back over her shoulder, not at Elias directly, but toward the cleared section, as if confirming something she had not noticed before. Her companion followed the glance, then continued, their conversation resuming at the same tone, but with a slightly different cadence, less interrupted. Behind the glass, a reflection paused again, more defined this time. The outline of Victoria Hale standing just beyond the frame of the corridor, her posture composed, but no longer angled away. She had moved closer without crossing into the walkway, the distance between observation and presence reduced by a few feet. Her gaze traced the path Elias had taken, not searching, but following the line of what had changed. She stepped forward once, the heel of her shoe placing down with controlled precision, and stopped at the edge of the alcove. From there, the adjustment he had made was visible in full, the cart aligned, the surface clear, the space functioning the way it was intended without drawing attention to itself. A maintenance report would not have captured it. There was no record, no ticket, just a difference in how people moved through the area. Elias, several yards ahead now, had already set his bag down at another panel. His focus returned to the task in front of him. He knelt, opening the access cover with the same measured turns, the motion unchanged, unaffected by what followed behind him. A man in a tailored suit approached from the opposite direction, his steps quick, eyes forward, and for a moment, the line of his movement intersected with the path Elias had cleared. He did not slow, did not shift his shoulder, passing through the space without noticing that he had not needed to adjust at all. The absence of interruption became its own quiet marker. Victoria remained where she was, her hand lifting slightly as if to rest against the glass again, then stopping short, hovering just above the surface. Her attention did not move away when Elias stood and secured the panel, the final turn of the screw bringing it flush with the wall. He reached for his cloth, wiping his hands once, folding it, and returning it to his pocket in a motion that matched every other task he had completed that day. There was no pause in his rhythm, no look back to measure the effect of what he had done. He picked up his bag and shifted it onto his shoulder, adjusting the strap with a small pull to settle the weight evenly. Behind him, the corridor held its new alignment, the movement through it smoother, quieter, the edges of interaction less jagged. An assistant passing near Victoria slowed, just slightly, as if waiting for instruction, but none came. Victoria's stance changed by a fraction, her weight shifting from one foot to the other, not a retreat, not an advance, but a recalibration. Her gaze remained on Elias as he moved farther down the hall, the distance increasing, yet the line of attention holding. For the first time, the space between them did not feel like a boundary to be maintained, but a measure to be considered. She lowered her hand, letting it fall to her side, and turned her head just enough to follow his path as it curved out of sight. The corridor resumed its usual activity, footsteps layering over one another, voices threading through the air, but the pattern carried a trace of something steadier, a continuity shaped by a change no one had announced. Elias reached the next junction and turned without hesitation, disappearing into another line of work, his pace unchanged, his posture the same. Behind him, the space he had left behind continued to function more cleanly than before, and in that quiet efficiency, something had shifted, not in him, but in how the space, and the people within it, began to register his presence. The corridor carried on, but the edges had softened, footsteps returned to their usual pace. Conversations filled the spaces between offices again, and the quiet no longer pressed in the same way. Elias moved through the next section of his route with the same steady rhythm, stopping at a wall panel near a corner where the light shifted from cool glass reflection to a warmer tone from recessed fixtures. He set his bag down, this time closer to his foot, keeping it aligned with the wall without looking at it, and crouched to check the connection inside. The screws turned clean, the panel opened without resistance, and he worked through the inspection in a measured sequence, one line at a time. Behind him, movement passed as it always did, but without the slight hesitations from earlier. A pair of assistants crossed paths nearby, their conversation uninterrupted, one of them adjusting her sleeve as she walked instead of glancing toward him. The attention that had gathered before had loosened, spreading back into the space rather than settling on him. Farther back, near the glass, Victoria remained where she had paused, but her posture had changed in a way that did not call attention to itself. Her weight shifted more evenly now, no longer angled toward the corridor, as if holding it in place. She took a step forward, not toward Elias directly, but along the path he had cleared, her heel placing down with the same controlled precision as before. This time, she did not stop at the edge. She continued past it, her movement uninterrupted, the line of her walk smooth, as if testing the space without breaking it. Her gaze moved briefly toward the wall where the cart had been, then returned forward, her focus settling ahead rather than holding behind. Near the midpoint of the corridor, she slowed just enough to allow someone exiting an office to pass before her. A small adjustment that would have gone unnoticed in any other moment, but here it carried a different weight, a choice rather than an expectation. Elias, a few yards away, finished securing the panel and closed it flush with the wall, his fingers running once along the edge to confirm the alignment before he stood. He picked up his bag and shifted it slightly, the strap settling across his shoulder in a practiced motion. As he turned, his path intersected with the space Victoria had just crossed. The distance between them narrowed, not by design, but by the natural flow of movement. She adjusted her pace by a fraction, not stopping, not stepping aside, but allowing the timing to fall into place so that neither had to alter their direction. They passed within a few feet of each other, the space between them clear, unobstructed. No words were exchanged, no acknowledgement given beyond the shared awareness of presence. Elias kept his gaze forward, his posture unchanged, while Victoria's eyes moved once, briefly, not to hold, but to register, then returned to the path ahead. Behind them, the corridor continued, its rhythm steady. The earlier tension no longer gathered in one place but dispersed across the space, leaving a quieter, more balanced movement in its wake. An assistant at the far end paused at a doorway, then stepped through without looking back, the moment unremarkable in its simplicity. Elias reached the next junction and turned, his steps even, his focus already shifting to the next task. Victoria continued in the opposite direction, her pace consistent, though once, as she passed the glass, her reflection lingered a fraction longer before aligning with her movement again. The space held that slight delay, that almost imperceptible difference, as if something had shifted just enough to remain present without needing to be resolved, and both of them moved forward within it, carrying the change without naming it. The corridor settled fully into its usual rhythm by late afternoon, the flow of movement steady, the quiet no longer carrying weight, but simply existing as part of the space. Elias finished securing the last panel on his route, his fingers brushing once along the edge to confirm it sat flush before he straightened, lifting his bag in a smooth motion and adjusting the strap without looking down. His steps remained even as he moved toward the elevator, passing through the same stretch of glass-lined walkway where the light had begun to soften, turning from sharp reflection to a warmer tone that stretched across the floor in long, quiet lines. A few people crossed his path, none slowing, none watching. Their attention returned to their own tasks, their pace natural again. Behind him, the space he had moved through held its order without drawing notice, the cart aligned, the floor clear, the small details absorbed back into the whole. Near the end of the corridor, Victoria stood just outside her office, a folder in one hand, her posture composed, the line of her shoulders unchanged. As Elias approached, she did not step forward, did not shift into his path, but she did not turn away either. Her gaze rested ahead for a moment longer than necessary, then moved, not quickly, not searching, simply adjusting. When he passed within a few feet, she made a small change, barely visible unless watched closely. She stepped half a pace to the side, not to yield, not to direct, but to clear the line of movement without forcing it, allowing him to continue without interruption. It was a subtle choice, one that replaced the stillness from before with motion, replacing distance with a shared understanding of space. Elias did not react. He continued forward at the same pace, his posture steady, his focus already shifting toward the elevator doors ahead. The moment passed as quietly as it had formed, leaving no mark except in the way the corridor held its balance afterward. Victoria remained where she was for a second longer, her hand adjusting the edge of the folder, aligning it with the seam of her sleeve before she turned and walked back into her office, the door closing with a soft, controlled sound. The hallway continued, footsteps layering into a familiar pattern, voices returning to their usual cadence. Elias reached the elevator and pressed the button, his hand lowering to his side as he waited, his reflection faint in the brushed metal. When the doors opened, he stepped inside without pause, turning slightly as the space enclosed him. Just before they closed, the light from the corridor stretched in a narrow line across the floor, then disappeared as the doors met. Inside, the quiet returned to something simple, contained. If that small shift in the hallway felt different to you, you are not alone. Moments like that tend to stay longer than expected. Thank you for being here.